Her uncle bartered her to buy whiskey, but a Sioux warrior traded his war pony to grant her freedom. In the lawless territory of Dakota in 1876, where human souls were currency and honor was rarer than gold, one girl's nightmare became the beginning of a legend that would echo across the Great Plains for generations. The dust never settled in Deadwood Creek. It hung in the air like the sins of desperate men, coating everything in a film of grit and regret. The ramshackle settlement squatted in a valley between two barren hills, existing solely to separate fools from their money and dreams from their dreamers. Saloons outnumbered churches 10 to 1, and the cemetery was the fastest growing part of town.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
On this particular October morning in 1876, the autumn wind carried more than dust through the crooked streets. It carried the scent of desperation, the sound of breaking hearts, and the promise of a transaction that would stain the town's already blackened-souled Mercy Hawthorne stood in the shadow of Uncle Ezekiel's wagon, her calloused hands gripping the wooden rail so tightly her knuckles had gone white. At 19, she possessed the kind of beauty that frontier life tried its best to destroy, but somehow failed to touch. Her auburn hair caught the morning light like burnished copper, and her green eyes held depths that spoke of intelligence, determination, and a spirit that refused to break despite years of hardship. But those same eyes now burned with betrayal and barely contained fury. She wore a simple dress of faded blue cotton, mended in a dozen places but clean and pressed with the care of someone who refused to let circumstances steal her dignity. A small locket hung at her throat, the only thing she owned that had belonged to her mother, and she touched it now like a talisman against the evil unfolding before her. Uncle Ezekiel Hawthorne was a man who had long ago sold his soul for easier pieces. His once proud frame had been bent by years of drinking, gambling, and making excuses for his failures. His gray beard was stained yellow with tobacco, his clothes reeked of stale whiskey and broken promises, and his pale blue eyes held the shifty, desperate look of a cornered rat. He stood across from three men, who represented everything ugly about the frontier's underbelly. The leader of the trio was Diamond Jack McCready, a flesh peddler who ran a string of brothels from Kansas City to San Francisco. He was a small, thin man with oiled black hair and clothes too fine for Deadwood Creek, but his expensive appearance couldn't hide the predator lurking beneath. His smile never reached his cold gray eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the smooth menace of a snake. Oil salesman promising salvation while selling damnation. Beside him stood Tobias the Collector Morgan, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and hands that had broken more bones than a frontier doctor had set. His face was a roadmap of old fights, and his reputation for collecting debts was legendary across 3 territories. Men paid Tobias what they owed not out of honor, but out of fear. The third man was Samuel Grimm, and if the other 2 were devils, Grimm was something worse. He was the kind of man who found pleasure in others' pain, who collected human misery like some men collected coins. His pale skin never seemed to tan despite years under the frontier sun, and his black eyes held no warmth, no mercy, no hint of the humanity that supposedly lived in every soul. "She's strong as an ox," Ezekiel was saying, his voice slurred despite the early hour. "Been working my claim for 3 years now, hauling water, cooking, mending. Never complains, never talks back. Well, not much anyway." He shot a nervous glance at Mercy, who stared back at him with undisguised contempt. Diamond Jack circled Mercy slowly, like a vulture evaluating carrion. "Teeth are good," he murmured, as if she were livestock at auction. "Hands are rough, but that's nothing that can't be fixed with time and the right motivation. She's got the look that appeals to certain clientele, that innocent frontier girl appearance that's becoming quite popular in the big cities." Mercy's stomach churned, but she forced herself to stand straighter, to meet Diamond Jack's appraising gaze without flinching. She had learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged predators. "The arrangement is simple, Ezekiel," Diamond Jack continued, pulling a bottle of amber liquid from his coat. The whiskey caught the morning sun like liquid gold, and Mercy watched her uncle's eyes fix on it with the hunger of an addict. "Your debts to me total $800. Far more than most men see in a lifetime out here. This bottle represents the finest Kentucky bourbon, worth $50 if it's worth a penny. But I'm prepared to call your entire debt settled. In exchange for the girl's single quotes, services. For a period of 5 years. 5 years. The words hit Mercy like a physical blow. 5 years in the brothels, serving men who saw her as nothing more than a commodity to be used and discarded. 5 years of degradation, violence, and slow death of the soul. She had heard the stories of girls who entered that life. Few survived it with their sanity intact, and fewer still ever escaped. "Uncle Ezekiel," she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "You promised my mother on her deathbed that you'd protect me. You swore on the Bible that you'd see me safely married to a good man. This isn't protection. This is betrayal of the deepest kind." Ezekiel's face crumpled for a moment, and she saw a flicker of the man he had once been, her mother's brother, who had bounced her on his knee and told her stories of brave pioneers and noble Indians. But that flicker died quickly, smothered by the weight of his addiction and the desperate need burning in his veins. "Your mother's dead, girl," he said harshly, not meeting her eyes. "Been dead 3 years now, and promises don't pay debts or fill empty bottles. You're 19 now, old enough to make your own way in the world. At least this way, you'll have a roof over your head and regular meals." "You know what kind of roof that would be," Mercy shot back, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "You know what those regular meals would cost me. You're selling me into slavery, Uncle, and you know it." The collector stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over both Mercy and her uncle. "Enough talking," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "The arrangement is fair, old man. Your niece works off your debt. Everyone's happy. Well, everyone who matters." But it was Samuel Grimm who spoke next, and his words chilled Mercy's blood. "The girl's got spirit," he said, his black eyes glittering with anticipation. "I like that. Spirit makes the breaking so much sweeter. Don't worry, my dear, we'll have you properly trained within a month. The wild ones always learn the fastest once they understand there's no escape." Mercy felt the world tilting around her as the reality of her situation crashed down like an avalanche. These men weren't just criminals, they were monsters, and her uncle was feeding her to them for the price of a bottle of whiskey. She thought of her mother, dying of fever in a one-room cabin, making Ezekiel promise to care for her only daughter. She thought of her father, killed in a mining accident when she was 16, leaving her in the care of a man she had trusted completely. The irony was bitter as poison. She had survived claim jumpers, harsh winters, food shortages, and the countless dangers of frontier life, only to be destroyed by the one person who should have protected her above all others. "I won't go," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "I won't be sold like a sack of grain or a broken-down horse. I'm a human being, not property, and I refuse to be treated as such." Diamond Jack's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Oh, my dear girl, you misunderstand the situation entirely. This isn't a negotiation. Your uncle has legal guardianship over you until you marry, and he's chosen to exercise that guardianship by placing you in our care. You have no say in the matter whatsoever." The collector cracked his knuckles with sounds like small bones snapping. "And if you try to run, we'll find you. We always do. The frontier's big, but it's not that big, and we have friends in every settlement from here to California."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Mercy looked around desperately, searching for any sign of help, any friendly face in the small crowd that had gathered to watch the spectacle. But the onlookers were the usual collection of drifters, prospectors, and degenerates that made up Deadwood Creek's population. Some watched with obvious interest, others with uncomfortable sympathy, but none with any intention of intervening. In a lawless land, might made right, and 3 armed men always trumped one defenseless girl. It was then that she noticed him standing at the edge of the crowd. So still he seemed like part of the landscape itself, was a figure that made her heart skip a beat. He was tall and lean, with the kind of build that spoke of a life lived in harmony with the harsh demands of the frontier. His skin was the deep bronze of someone who had spent countless hours under the prairie sun, and his long black hair was adorned with feathers and beads that caught the morning light. He wore buckskin leggings and a shirt decorated with intricate beadwork, and a single eagle feather hung from a thin braid behind his left ear. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. Dark as midnight, steady as stone, and filled with an intelligence and compassion that stood in stark contrast to the predatory gazes of the men surrounding her. Those eyes seemed to see everything, understand everything, and judge everything with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed both the best and worst of human nature. He was Dakota Strongheart, though she would not learn his name for some time yet. Among his people, the Lakota Sioux, he was known as a warrior of exceptional courage and honor, a man who had counted coup against enemies in battle and earned the respect of chiefs and medicine men alike. But he was also known for something else, an unwavering commitment to justice that transcended the boundaries of tribe, race, or nationality. At 26, Dakota had seen enough of the white man's world to understand its cruelties, but also enough to know that not all who wore pale skin were enemies. He had fought against the cavalry when they invaded Sioux land, but he had also saved white children from raiding parties when his own war chiefs would have killed them. He walked a path between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither, but understanding both with crystal clarity. He had come to Deadwood Creek, not by choice, but by necessity. His younger sister had been taken by slave traders 3 months ago, and his search for her had led him through a dozen frontier towns, following cold trails and following colder leads. The irony that he would witness another girl being sold into bondage was not lost on him, nor was the opportunity it presented. Dakota studied the scene before him with the careful attention of a hunter evaluating prey. He saw the desperate uncle, weak and corrupted by his addictions. He saw the 3 predators, confident in their power and certain of their victory. And he saw the girl, proud, defiant, terrified, but refusing to show it. In her green eyes he recognized something that called to the deepest part of his warrior's soul, the spirit of someone who would rather die fighting than live in chains. The negotiation was reaching its conclusion. Diamond Jack was reaching for the bottle of whiskey, preparing to seal the devil's bargain with Ezekiel. The collector was pulling out a set of iron shackles, clearly intending to secure his new acquisition immediately. Samuel Grimm was licking his lips in anticipation of the torments to come, and Mercy was preparing to run. Dakota could see it in the subtle shift of her weight, the way her eyes darted toward the gaps between buildings, the slight bunching of muscles in her legs. She was going to bolt, probably in the next few seconds. It would be a desperate move, almost certainly doomed to failure, but it would be the action of someone who refused to surrender without a fight. It was in that moment, watching a girl prepare to throw her life away rather than submit to evil, that Dakota made his decision. He stepped forward, his moccasined feet making no sound on the dusty ground. The crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship, and suddenly he was standing in the center of the circle, close enough to smell the fierce sweat on the white men and the desperation on the girl. "I would speak," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. The silence that followed was complete and electric. Every eye in the crowd fixed on this unexpected addition to the drama, this wild card that had just inserted itself into a game with the highest possible stakes. Diamond Jack was the first to recover his composure, though his hand drifted instinctively toward the pistol at his hip. "This is white man's business, Indian. Move along before you find yourself in more trouble than you can handle." Lakota ignored the threat completely, his dark eyes fixed instead on Mercy. When he spoke, his words were directed to her, though he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You do not wish to go with these men." It wasn't a question, but Mercy answered anyway. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not." Lakota nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he turned his attention to the three men who held her fate in their hands. "The girl does not wish to go," he said simply. "Therefore, she will not go." The collector's laugh was like the growl of a bear. "And just who's going to stop us, Redskin?" "You? One Indian against 3 armed men. I don't think you understand the odds." "I understand them perfectly," Lakota replied with calm certainty. "But you misunderstand the nature of the situation. This is not about odds. This is about what is right." Samuel Grimm stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "Right? What's right is that we have a legal contract with the girl's guardian. What's right is that debts get paid one way or another. What's right is that you mind your own business before we make it our business to put you in the ground." Lakota's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle alteration that transformed him from observer to predator in the space of a heartbeat. Suddenly, the 3 men found themselves facing not just an Indian, but a warrior in his prime, a man who had survived countless battles and emerged victorious from conflicts that would have destroyed lesser men. "You speak of legal contracts," Lakota said, his voice still calm, but now carrying an edge like a knife blade. "But there are laws older than the ones written by white men in their books. Laws that say a person cannot be owned by another. Laws that say the strong have a duty to protect the weak. Laws that say evil must be challenged wherever it is found." He reached slowly into a leather pouch at his belt, and every gun in the circle twitched toward him. But instead of a weapon, he withdrew something that made the entire crowd gasp in surprise and recognition. It was a war pony's bridle, not just any bridle, but one crafted from the finest materials available to the Plains Indians. The leather was soft as silk and black as midnight, decorated with silver concos that caught and reflected the morning sun like fallen stars. The bit was forged from steel traded from Mexican smiths, and the reins were braided with threads of real silver that had cost more than most white men earned in a year. But it was the significance of the bridle that truly mattered. Every person in that circle, white and Indian alike, knew what it represented. A warrior's war pony was more than just a horse. It was his partner in battle, his companion in the hunt, his most prized possession. The bond between a Plains warrior and his war horse was sacred, deeper than marriage, stronger than brotherhood. To trade away such an animal was to give up a piece of one's very soul. "My horse," Lakota said simply, holding the bridle where everyone could see it. "His name is Wickapi-Oyet, which means Star Nation in your tongue. He is a stallion of the finest bloodline, trained from birth for war and the hunt. He has carried me through 20 battles and has never known defeat. His speed is legend among my people, and his courage is sung about in our medicine lodges." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "He is worth more than all the gold in this miserable settlement. More than a dozen bottles of your whiskey, more than any debt owed by any man." Diamond Jack's eyes had gone wide with avarice. A war horse of the quality Lakota described would be worth a fortune to the right buyer, not just for its practical value, but as a symbol of status and power. Such animals were rarely traded by their Indian owners and never sold to whites under normal circumstances. "You're saying you want to buy the girl?" Diamond Jack asked, his voice tight with barely controlled greed. "I am saying," Dakota replied, carefully, "that I offer this bridle and the horse that goes with it in exchange for the girl's freedom. Not to own her, but to free her. She would owe me nothing, be bound to me in no way. She would be free to choose her own path, make her own decisions, live her own life." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind stirring, the dust and the distant hammering of a blacksmith at work. Every person in the crowd was calculating, weighing, considering the implications of what they had just heard. Ezekiel was the first to speak, his voice thick with wonder and confusion. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you trade away your warhorse? For a girl you don't even know? What's in it for you?" Dakota was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant as if seeing something beyond the squalid little settlement and its desperate inhabitants. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of old pain and older wisdom. "3 moons ago," he said slowly, "white men came to our camp in the night. They took my sister, a girl of 17 summers, beautiful and innocent as the morning star. They took her to sell to men like these, to be used and broken and destroyed for the pleasure of others. I have searched for her since that night, following cold trails and false promises, but I have not found her." His gaze returned to the present, to Mercy's face, and she saw in his eyes a depth of sorrow that made her heart ache. "I could not save my sister," he continued, "but perhaps I can save you. Perhaps that will begin to balance the scales of justice that have been tilted so far toward darkness in this land." Mercy felt tears threaten to spill down her cheeks, but she blinked them back fiercely. This stranger, this Sioux warrior, was offering to sacrifice his most precious possession to save her from a fate worse than death. The magnitude of his gesture, the pure selflessness of it, was almost too much to comprehend. But Diamond Jack was not moved by noble gestures or tales of sisterly devotion. He was a businessman, first and always, and he could smell profit in the air like a buzzard smelling carrion. "Let me see this horse," he said finally. "If it's really as valuable as you claim, we might have a deal. But I'm not trading away $800 worth of flesh for some broken-down Indian pony." Dakota nodded once, then placed 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, a sound like the cry of a hunting eagle, sharp and wild, and utterly unlike anything the white men had ever heard. The whistle echoed off the surrounding hills and seemed to hang in the air like a living thing. The response came within moments. From beyond the last buildings of Deadwood Creek, from the open prairie where the morning mist still clung to the grass, came the sound of hoofbeats. Not the heavy, plodding sound of a workhorse or the quick patter of a riding horse, but something else entirely, the rhythmic thunder of a creature born to run, bred for war, trained for battle. Wikapi Oyet appeared like a vision from the Chia legends of the Old West. He was a paint stallion of extraordinary beauty, his coat a mixture of gleaming black and pure white that seemed to shift and flow in the morning light. He stood nearly 16 hands high, with the powerful chest and lean legs of a horse bred for both speed and endurance. His mane flowed like black silk in the wind, and his eyes blazed with intelligence and spirit, but it was more than just his physical beauty that took the breath away. There was something in the way he moved, something in his bearing that spoke of nobility, courage, and an unbreakable bond with the man who had trained him. This was not just a horse. This was a legend on 4 legs, a living symbol of everything. Wild and free about the American frontier, the stallion galloped straight toward the crowd, showing no sign of slowing, and several people scattered in alarm. But at the last possible moment, he skidded to a stop mere feet from where Dakota stood, his hooves throwing up a cloud of dust that glittered in the morning sun. The horse's arrival had an electric effect on the crowd. Men who had seen fine horses, All their lives stood slack-jawed at the sight of Wickupi Oyat. Even hardened criminals and frontier degenerates could recognize perfection when they saw it. And this stallion was as close to perfect as any horse had ever been. Diamond Jack's eyes had gone wide with naked greed. A horse like this would be worth a fortune to the right buyer. Army officers who wanted a mount that would set them apart from their peers. Wealthy ranchers who collected fine horseflesh like other men collected art. Circus owners who would pay top dollar for an animal with such obvious intelligence and training. Jesus Christ on a crutch, breathed the collector. I ain't never seen a horse like that in all my born days. Samuel Grimm was licking his lips again, but this time with avarice rather than anticipated cruelty. That animal's worth more than the girl, more than 10 girls. Hell, it's worth more than this whole stinking town. But it was Ezekiel who surprised everyone with his reaction. The broken-down drunk who had been prepared to sell his own niece for a bottle of whiskey suddenly found himself staring at something that stirred memories of the man he had once been. He had been a horseman once before the drinking destroyed his judgment and his pride. He could recognize quality when he saw it, and what he saw standing before him was nothing short of magnificent. My God, he whispered, his voice filled with awe. That's the finest piece of horseflesh I've ever laid eyes on. That horse's worth. Hell, I don't know what it's worth. More than money can measure. That's for sure. Dakota stood beside his stallion, one hand resting lightly on the powerful neck, and waited for the white men to make their decision. But Mercy could see something in his eyes that the others missed. A deep, abiding sadness at the thought of giving up this magnificent creature, this partner who had shared his dangers and his triumphs for so many years. The bond between them was obvious to anyone who looked closely. The way the horse stood perfectly still without rope or halter, the way his ears swiveled constantly toward his master's voice, the way his dark eyes seemed to mirror the intelligence and nobility in Dakota's own gaze. This was not just a man and his horse. This was a partnership forged in fire and blood, tested in battle, strengthened by mutual trust and respect. And Dakota was prepared to give it all up for a girl he had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. Morning sun climbed higher over Deadwood Creek as Diamond Jack McCready circled the magnificent stallion like a vulture studying its next meal. His practiced eye took in every detail of Wickupi Oyat's conformation, the powerful shoulders, the clean legs, the intelligent eyes that seemed to follow his every movement with barely concealed disdain. This was no ordinary horse, and Jack knew it. This was the kind of animal that legends were built around, the kind that generals wrote into history books and wealthy men paid fortunes to possess. The horse is acceptable, Jack said finally, though his voice betrayed his excitement. But there are conditions to this trade that need to be established. The girl comes with us willingly, no struggles, no attempts to escape. Any problems from her, and the deal is off. We keep the horse, and she still comes with us. Dakota's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. The girl chooses freely. If she wishes to leave with you after understanding what freedom means, that is her decision. But if she chooses freedom, you will honor that choice and never pursue her again. The collector stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the group. You're in no position to make demands, Indian. We're doing you a favor by even considering this trade. That girl represents 5 years of guaranteed income. Your horse, no matter how pretty, is just one sale. One sale worth more than your 5 years of blood money, Dakota replied calmly. But perhaps you need time to consider the mathematics of the situation. It was then that Samuel Grimm made his move. Quick as a striking snake, his hand flashed to his gun, the weapon clearing leather with practiced ease. But Dakota had been watching, waiting for exactly this moment. Before Grimm could bring the pistol to bear, the Sioux warrior's own hand moved, not to a gun, but to something far deadlier in the right hands. The throwing knife left Dakota's Fingers like a bolt of silver lightning, its perfectly balanced blade spinning end over end through the morning air. It struck Grimm's gun hand with surgical precision, the razor-sharp steel slicing clean through the tendons that controlled his grip. The pistol tumbled from nerveless fingers as Grimm screamed in pain and surprise, clutching his wounded hand. Against his chest, the entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. "The next one finds your throat," Dakota said conversationally, producing a second knife from somewhere within his buckskin shirt. "Your choice." Diamond Jack and the Collector had their own weapons half drawn, but they froze as they realized the impossible speed and accuracy they were facing. This wasn't just any Indian. This was a warrior who had honed his skills in life-or-death situations, a man for whom violence was not a last resort, but a familiar tool to be wielded with. Deadly efficiency. "Jesus Christ," the Collector breathed, his hand still hovering over his gun butt. "How fast are you, Indian?" "Fast enough," Dakota replied simply. "Now, shall we return to the business at hand? Or would you prefer to test whether I am faster than 3 men drawing guns?" Mercy watched this exchange with a mixture of terror and awe. She had seen men threaten each other before. The frontier was full of bluster and bravado, but this was different. This was a man who killed with the same casual precision that other men used to swat flies, and he was doing it to protect her. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. Diamond Jack holstered his weapon with exaggerated care, his eyes never leaving Dakota's face. "There's no need for more violence," he said, though his voice carried the promise of future retribution. "We're all civilized men here, conducting civilized business." "Speak for yourself," Ezekiel muttered, and Mercy shot him a look of pure disgust. Her uncle had stood by and watched her nearly be murdered without lifting a finger to help. Whatever family feeling she might have retained for him died in that moment like a flame snuffed by cold wind, but Dakota wasn't finished. He whistled softly, and Wikapi Oyet stepped forward until his great head was level with his master's shoulder. The stallion's eyes fixed on Diamond Jack with an intelligence that was almost human, and Mercy could have sworn she saw recognition there, and judgment. "Before we complete this trade," Dakota said, his hand resting on the horse's neck, "there are things you must understand about what you are receiving. Wikapi Oyet is not like the broken horses you are accustomed to dealing with. He has never worn a white man's saddle, never felt the bite of spurs, never been broken to harness or plow." The stallion snorted softly, as if agreeing with his master's words, and pawed the ground with one massive hoof. "He will accept only certain riders," Dakota continued. "He chooses his own battles, his own pace, his own direction. Try to force him, and he will fight you. Try to break his spirit, and he will break your bones. He is not a slave, he is a partner, and he must be treated as such." Diamond Jack's eyes glittered with avarice and something else, the look of a man who enjoyed breaking beautiful things simply because they were beautiful. "Every horse can be broken," he said confidently. "It's just a matter of knowing the right techniques, applying the right pressure. I've never met an animal I couldn't tame." "Then you have never met an animal like this one," Dakota replied. "But that is your concern now, not mine." He turned to Mercy, and when he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that was in stark contrast to the deadly efficiency he had displayed moments before. "The choice is yours, Mercy Hawthorne. You can go with these men and fulfill your uncle's bargain, or you can walk away free. But understand that freedom comes with its own price. You will have no family, no home, no protection. Accept what you can provide for yourself." Mercy looked around the circle of faces watching her, her uncle's weak, desperate features, the cruel calculating expressions of the 3 criminals, the curious stares of the crowd that had gathered to witness this unusual drama. Then she looked at Dakota, this stranger who was offering her something no one else ever had, a choice. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you sacrifice so much for someone you don't know? Dakota was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant, as if seeing across great expanses of time and space. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of old grief and older wisdom. Among my people, he said slowly, we believe that every soul is connected to every other soul by invisible threads that stretch across the world like a great web. When one person suffers, the whole web trembles. When one person is freed, the whole web grows stronger. He gestured toward the stallion, standing so quietly beside him. Wikapi Oyet and I have shared many battles, many dangers, many victories. But the greatest victory is not in defeating enemies, it is in saving innocence. Today, we have the chance to cut one thread of suffering from the great web. That is worth any sacrifice. The simplicity of his words, the quiet dignity with which he spoke them, hit Mercy like a physical blow. Here was a man who lived by a code so pure, so uncompromising, that he would give up his most precious possession to save a stranger from degradation. It was a kind of nobility she had never encountered before, a strength that came not from violence or dominance, but from an unwavering commitment to what was right. I choose freedom, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I choose to walk away from this place, from these men, from the life they would force upon me. And I swear by my mother's grave that I will prove worthy of the sacrifice being made for me. Diamond Jack's face contorted with rage and frustration. This is insane, he snarled. We had a deal, Ezekiel, a legal binding agreement. The deal stands, Dakota said firmly. But it stands between you and me now, not between you and the girl. You received the horse in exchange for releasing all claims to her. That was the bargain offered and accepted. But we lose years of income, the collector protested. Years of guaranteed profit. And you gain something worth far more, Dakota replied. But that is your choice to make. It was then that Samuel Grimm, still clutching his wounded hand, made a mistake that would cost him dearly. Pulling a hidden derringer from his boot with his uninjured hand, he aimed it not at Dakota, but at Mercy. If we can't have her willing, he hissed, we'll take her dead. Damaged goods are better than no goods at all. The gunshot rang out like thunder in the morning air, but it was not Grimm's derringer that fired. Dakota's second knife had found its mark with the same deadly precision as the first, burying itself to the hilt in Grimm's chest. The man's eyes went wide with shock and disbelief before he toppled backward into the dust, his blood mixing with the dirt of Deadwood Creeks. Main Street. The silence that followed was complete and profound. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing, as if nature herself was holding her breath in the aftermath of sudden death. He chose his fate, Dakota said simply, retrieving his knife and cleaning it on Grimm's shirt with casual efficiency. As we all do. Diamond Jack and the collector stood frozen, their faces pale with shock and the sudden realization that they were dealing with a man who would kill without hesitation to protect those under his protection. The casual way Dakota had ended Grimm's life, the complete lack of emotion or regret in his actions, spoke of a warrior who had taken many lives and would take many more if necessary. The horse, Jack said finally, his voice hoarse with fear and lingering greed. We'll take the horse and call it even. But this isn't over, Indian. You've made enemies today that will remember your face. I have made enemies every day of my life, Dakota replied calmly. They are buried in the earth behind me like mile markers on a long trail. Do not think you are special. The transfer of Wikapi Oyet was unlike anything the crowd had ever witnessed. Instead of simply handing over the reins, Dakota approached his stallion with reverence bordering on the sacred. He spoke to the great horse in the Lakota language, his voice low and musical, his hands gentle as they stroked the powerful neck and shoulders. The stallion listened with an intelligence that was almost supernatural, his ears swiveling to catch every word, his dark eyes never leaving his master's face. When Lakota finished speaking, the horse nickered softly and pressed his forehead against the warrior's chest in a gesture of such obvious affection that several people in the crowd felt tears well up in their eyes. I have told him that he goes to new people now, Lakota explained to the watching crowd. I have asked him to remember the lessons we have learned together, to remain strong and proud no matter what they do to him. And I have promised him that one day, when the great circle is complete, we will run together again across the endless grass. He removed the beautiful bridle from his pouch and slipped it over the stallion's head with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. The horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment, the finality of what was taking place. He is yours now, Lakota said to Diamond Jack, though his voice carried no warmth or friendship. But remember what I told you. He cannot be broken, only destroyed. Treat him with respect, and he may serve you well. Treat him cruelly, and he will find ways to repay that cruelty tenfold. Diamond Jack reached for the reins with hands that shook slightly, whether from excitement or fear it was impossible to tell. But the moment his fingers touched the leather, Wikapi Oyet's head came up sharply, his ears flattening against his skull, his eyes rolling white with sudden agitation. The stallion's reaction was immediate and violent. He reared up on his hind legs, his hooves flashing dangerously close to Jack's head, his scream of rage and defiance echoing off the surrounding buildings like a battle cry. For a moment, all his wild heritage was visible, the untamed spirit of the plains, the freedom of endless horizons, the proud independence that no man had ever truly conquered. Diamond Jack stumbled backward, nearly losing his grip on the reins, his face pale with sudden understanding. This was no broken cow pony or plodding draft horse. This was a force of nature barely contained within horseflesh, a creature that had chosen to serve but had never been mastered. Easy, Jack said nervously, his voice higher than usual. Easy, boy. We're going to be friends, you and me. The stallion's response was to rear again, this time striking out with his front hooves in a display of power and fury that sent several onlookers scrambling for safety. It was clear that Wikapi Oyet had no intention of accepting his new owners. Quietly, Lakota watched this display with an expression that might have been satisfaction or sadness, or something between the two. He is saying goodbye to his old life, he explained calmly, and telling you what he thinks of his new one. It took the collector and 3 other men to help Diamond Jack control the magnificent animal long enough to lead him away toward the makeshift corral at the edge of town. Even then, the stallion fought every step, his head high, his eyes blazing with undiminished defiance. As the group disappeared around a corner, leading the struggling horse away, Mercy felt her heart break a little for the noble animal who was paying the price for her freedom. But she also felt something else, a fierce determination to prove that his sacrifice had not been in vain. What happens now? She asked Lakota, suddenly aware that she was completely alone in the world for the first time in her life. Now, he replied, you begin to learn what freedom truly means. It is not the absence of masters, it is the presence of choice. And every choice you make from this moment forward will define who you become. He reached into another pouch at his belt and withdrew a small leather bag that clinked softly with the sound of coins. This will buy you supplies for several weeks and passage on a wagon train heading east, if that is what you choose. Or west to California, if you prefer. The decision is yours alone. Mercy stared at the bag in amazement. You're giving me money too? But you've already given up so much. Money is nothing, Lakota said simply. It can be earned again, lost again, earned again. What matters is that you use your freedom wisely. Make choices that honor the sacrifice that was made for you. Live a life that adds light to the world instead of darkness. Uncle Ezekiel, who had been standing in stunned silence throughout the entire exchange, finally found his voice. Mercy, he said weakly, maybe we can work something out. maybe you don't have to leave. We could." "No," she said firmly, turning to face the man who had raised her, who had betrayed her, who had been willing to sell her soul for a bottle of whiskey. "There is no we anymore, Uncle Ezekiel. You made your choice when you decided I was worth less than your next drink. Live with it." The pain in her uncle's eyes was real and deep, but Mercy felt no pity for him. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal, some trust once broken could never be repaired. He had chosen his path, and now she would choose hers. She turned back to Dakota. This stranger who had shown her more kindness in one morning than her own family had shown her in years. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "Perhaps," he replied. "The world is large, but the paths of the righteous often cross when they are most needed. Until that day, remember what you have learned here. Remember that every person has value that cannot be measured in gold or whiskey or fear. Remember that sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing when not to fight." With that, he turned and walked away, his moccasined feet making no sound on the dusty street. The crowd parted before him like water, and within moments he had disappeared around a corner, leaving Mercy standing alone in the middle of Deadwood Creek with a bag of coins, her freedom, and the beginning of a new life stretching out before her like an unmarked trail across the endless prairie. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the mist that had clung to the surrounding hills. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of Wikapi Oyet, still fighting his new captors, his cries of defiance echoing across the settlement, like a reminder that some spirits could be contained but never conquered. Mercy Hawthorne tucked the bag of coins inside her dress, straightened her shoulders, and began to walk toward whatever future awaited her beyond the boundaries of this miserable little town. She had been born into bondage, raised in dependence, and nearly sold into slavery. But today, for the first time in her life, she was truly free, and she intended to make the most of it. 3 weeks after the trade that shook Deadwood Creek, the autumn wind carried the scent of snow down from the high peaks of the Black Hills. The aspen leaves had turned to gold, creating a carpet of fire across the mountain slopes, and the first killing frost had painted the prairie grass silver in the early mornings. It was a time of endings and beginnings, when the old year died and the new one waited to be born in the depths of winter's embrace. Mercy Hawthorne sat beside a crackling campfire in a grove of cottonwoods along the banks of the Cheyenne River, watching the flames dance against the gathering darkness. She had traveled over 200 miles since leaving Deadwood Creek, following wagon trains, trading posts, and her own stubborn determination to put as much distance as possible between herself and the life she had escaped. The money Dakota had given her had proved sufficient to purchase basic supplies: a sturdy horse named Buttercup, a bedroll, cooking utensils, enough dried goods to last several weeks, and a used but serviceable Colt revolver that the gun dealer had assured her was perfect for a lady's protection. She had also bought men's clothing, leather pants, a heavy wool shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her features and helped disguise her gender when necessary. Traveling alone as a woman in the frontier territories was dangerous beyond measure, but Mercy had discovered reserves of strength and cunning she never knew she possessed. She had learned to sleep with one eye open, to trust her instincts about which travelers were safe and which were predators, and to use her intelligence as a weapon when brute force wasn't an option. But despite her growing confidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. It had started as nothing more than a vague unease, a prickle between her shoulder blades when she stopped at trading posts or settlements along her route. Then she began noticing the same faces in different towns, men who seemed to have no business being there, who watched her with calculating eyes and disappeared when she tried to get a closer look at them. Tonight, that feeling was stronger than ever. As she stirred the beans and salt pork bubbling in her small pot, Mercy found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, scanning the darkening landscape for signs of movement. The wind whispered through the cottonwood leaves with a sound like voices plotting in the shadows. and every snapping twig or rustling bush made her hand drift instinctively toward the gun at her hip. She was so focused on the surrounding darkness that she almost missed the soft sound of approaching hoofbeats. Almost. The riders came out of the night, like ghosts materialized from the prairie mist. There were 4 of them, their faces hidden beneath the brims of their hats, their horses moving with the careful silence of predators stalking prey. They had positioned themselves to block all possible escape routes, one directly across the river, one upstream, one downstream, and one between Mercy and the open prairie. "Well, well," said a familiar voice, and Mercy's blood turned to ice as Diamond Jack McCready urged his horse into the circle of firelight. "Miss Mercy Hawthorne, as I live and breathe. You've led us quite a chase, my dear." Jack looked different than he had in Deadwood Creek. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by trail-worn leather and rough wool. His face was leaner, harder, marked by weeks of rough living and frustrated pursuit. But his eyes still held the same cold calculation, the same predatory hunger that had terrified her in Uncle Ezekiel's wagon. "We've been following you for 3 weeks, he continued conversationally, dismounting with fluid grace. "You're quite the clever little rabbit, I'll give you that. Zigzagging across the territory, staying ahead of us by just enough to make the chase interesting. But all chases end eventually, and this one ends tonight." Mercy's hand was already on her gun, but she forced herself to remain calm, to think instead of simply reacting. 4 men against 1 woman, the odds were impossible. But panic would only make them worse. "The deal was made," she said firmly, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Dakota traded his horse for my freedom. You accepted that trade." "Ah, yes, the noble red savage and his magnificent stallion," Jack said with a bitter laugh. "That horse nearly killed 3 of my best men before we managed to get him under control. And even now, weeks later, he's about as useful as a mountain lion in a church service. But that's neither here nor there." The collector emerged from the shadows, his massive frame even more intimidating in the flickering firelight. His face bore fresh scars, long parallel scratches that could only have come from animal claws. "The horse ain't the issue," he rumbled. "The issue is reputation." Word's gotten around about what happened in Deadwood Creek, about how Diamond Jack McCready got outsmarted by an Indian and lost his prize without getting what he came for. The 3rd rider was a stranger to Mercy, a thin, nervous man with twitchy eyes and hands that never stayed still. But it was the 4th figure that made her heart skip a beat with recognition and terror. Samuel Grimm stepped into the light, very much alive despite the knife wound that should have killed him. His chest was wrapped in bandages visible beneath his shirt, and he moved with the careful stiffness of a man still healing from serious injury. But his black eyes burned with the same malevolent intelligence, now sharpened by a thirst for revenge that was almost palpable. "Impossible," Mercy whispered. "Dakota killed you." "I saw the knife." "You saw me wounded," Grimm corrected with a smile like a blade. "Badly wounded, I'll admit. Took 2 weeks for the local doctor to dig that pig sticker out of my ribs and sew me back together. But I'm a hard man to kill, Miss Hawthorne, and I have a very long memory for people who've wronged me." Jack was circling the fire now, staying just outside the range where Mercy could draw and fire before he could react. "You see, my dear, the trade your Indian friend made was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. He thought he was buying your freedom, but what he actually purchased was time. Time for us to regroup, to plan, to recruit additional help for the task of reclaiming our property." "I'm not property," Mercy said through gritted teeth. "I'm a human being with rights and freedoms that no man can take away." "Rights?" The collector laughed, a sound like boulders grinding together. "Out here, the only rights you have are the ones you can defend with gun and blade. And last I checked, you're just 1 woman against 4 determined men." But it was Grimm who delivered the crushing blow to her hopes. "Besides," he said with obvious relish. "We've learned some interesting things about your noble protector in the week since Deadwood Creek. Would you like to know what we discovered?" Mercy said nothing, but something in her expression must have encouraged him to continue. "Your Dakota Strongheart isn't the paragon of virtue you think he is," Grim continued. "Turns out he's got quite the reputation among the cavalry boys. They call him the Ghost Killer, responsible for the deaths of at least 30 soldiers over the past 5 years. Women and children too, in some of the raids he's led." "You're lying," Mercy said, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "Am I?" Captain Morrison at Fort Laramie was quite chatty about the whole thing once we convinced him we were bounty hunters working for the government. "Seems your precious warrior has been terrorizing settlements from Montana to Colorado, leaving a trail of bodies wherever he goes." The words hit Mercy like physical blows. She thought of Dakota's quiet dignity, his gentle manner, the way he had spoken about the invisible threads connecting all souls. Could the same man who had saved her from degradation really be a cold-blooded killer? "Even if that's true," she said finally, "it doesn't change what he did for me. And it doesn't give you the right to hunt me down like an animal." "Rights again," Jack said with mock sadness. "You really don't understand how the world works, do you? We don't need rights. We have strength, numbers, and determination. That's all we've ever needed." The thin, nervous man, whom Jack introduced as Silas Crane, a tracker who specialized in finding runaway women, had been examining the ground around Mercy's campsite with professional interest. "She's been clever," he reported. "Following stream beds to hide her trail, doubling back on her own tracks, using rocks and hard ground to avoid leaving clear prints. But she made one mistake." He pointed to Buttercup, grazing peacefully near the river's edge. "That horse has a distinctive shoe print. The left rear shoe has a crack in it that leaves a unique mark. Easy to follow once you know what to look for." Mercy cursed herself silently. She had been so focused on covering her own tracks that she hadn't thought about the horse's hoof prints. It was the kind of oversight that could get you killed on the frontier, and now it had. "So here's what's going to happen," Jack said, his voice taking on the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You're going to come with us quietly, without any fuss or bother. In exchange, we won't hurt you more than absolutely necessary. Try to run, try to fight, try to cause us any trouble at all, and we'll make sure you regret it for however long you have left to regret anything. And if I refuse?" Grim's smile widened into something that belonged in nightmares. "Then we take you anyway, but not in the same ... condition ... that we would have preferred. There are buyers who don't mind damaged goods, as long as the damage isn't too extensive." Mercy looked around the circle of faces surrounding her, cruel, determined, utterly without mercy or compassion. These men had spent weeks tracking her across hundreds of miles of wilderness, driven by greed, wounded pride, and in Grim's case, a desire for revenge that bordered on obsession. They would not be reasoned with, negotiated with, or deterred by appeals to any better nature they might once have possessed. But as she prepared to draw her gun and sell her life as dearly as possible, the night suddenly erupted into chaos. The attack came without warning, striking from the darkness beyond the firelight like the wrath of an avenging god. One moment the 4 men were standing in confident control of the situation, and the next moment the collector was screaming as something large and powerful struck him from behind, sending him tumbling into the river with a splash that echoed across the water. Silas Crane spun toward the sound, his hand clawing for his gun, but he never had a chance to draw it. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Dakota Strongheart materialized in the firelight like a spirit of vengeance, his war paint making his face a mask of terrible beauty in the dancing flames. But he was not alone. With him came Wakapi Oyet, the magnificent stallion moving like flowing water despite the crude rope halter that had replaced his beautiful bridle. The horse's eyes blazed with fury and recognition as he spotted the men who had tormented him for 3 weeks, and his scream of rage shattered the night air. Like a battle cry. Impossible, Jack breathed, his face pale with shock and sudden fear. The horse was secured, guarded ... Your guards sleep the sleep of the defeated, Dakota said calmly, materializing behind Jack with a knife pressed against the man's throat. They will wake with headaches and broken pride, but they will wake. You, however, have a choice to make. Grim had managed to draw his gun, but he found himself facing not just Dakota, but the full fury of 1,500 pounds of enraged warhorse. Wickapi Oyet reared up on his hind legs, his hooves flashing in the firelight like striking hammers, and Grim threw himself backward to avoid being trampled. The collector struggled to his feet in the shallow water, coughing and spitting, his massive frame reduced to a sodden, floundering mass of confusion and rage. "Kill them," he roared. "Kill them both." But Silas Crane was already running, his nerve broken by the sudden reversal of fortune. He disappeared into the darkness beyond the cottonwoods, his footsteps fading into the distance as he fled from a fight that had turned impossibly against them. 3 weeks, Dakota said conversationally, his knife never wavering from Jack's throat. 3 weeks I have followed you as you followed her. 3 weeks I have watched you hunt an innocent woman, like wolves hunting a deer. 3 weeks I have waited for the right moment to remind you that some trades cannot be undone. You can't be everywhere, Jack said through gritted teeth. You can't protect her forever. There are others who will come, others who know her value. Perhaps, Dakota agreed, but they will have to go through me to reach her. And tonight, you will carry word back to them about what happens to men who break faith with the Lakota. What followed was swift, brutal, and final. Dakota moved like flowing water, like wind through grass, like death itself when it comes calling. For those who have earned its attention. By the time the violence ended, 2 men lay still beside the dying fire, their blood mixing with the rich earth of the riverbank. Diamond Jack McCready, wounded but alive, stumbled toward his horse with Dakota's warning ringing in his ears. Tell them all. The girl is under the protection of Dakota Strongheart, and that protection extends to the ends of the earth. Let any who would challenge that protection prepare to join their friends in the spirit world. As Jack disappeared into the night, clutching his wounds and his shattered pride, Mercy stood frozen beside the fire, her gun finally drawn but never fired. The sudden violence, the swift reversal of fortune, the presence of the man she had thought she would never see again. It was almost too much for her mind to process. You came back, she whispered. I never left, Dakota replied simply. I have been following at a distance, ensuring your safety without interfering with your journey toward independence. But when these men began hunting you in earnest, my choice became clear. Wickapi Oyet approached Mercy with careful steps, his great head lowering until she could feel his warm breath on her face. The rope halter fell away as Dakota cut it with his knife, and suddenly the magnificent stallion was free again, his wild heritage restored in a single moment. He remembers you, Dakota said softly. He remembers the woman whose freedom he purchased with his own. In the Lakota way, that makes you his sister, his family. He will always come when you are in danger. Mercy reached out with trembling hands to touch the stallion's velvet nose, marveling at the gentleness and eyes that had blazed with such fury moments before. How did you find him? How did you escape from them? They tried to break him, Dakota sighed, and there was something in his voice that spoke of barely controlled rage. Whips, spurs, chains, starvation. They used every cruelty they could devise to bend his spirit to their will. But Wickapi Oyet is not like other horses. The more they hurt him, the stronger his desire for freedom became. The stallion snorted softly and pressed his forehead against Mercy's chest, a gesture of such obvious affection that tears sprang to her eyes. 3 nights ago, he broke free of their corral and came looking for me. He found me camped 10 miles away, following your trail. Together, we have been planning this moment ever since." Mercy looked at the 2 bodies by the fire, at the blood soaking into the earth, at the man who had killed to protect her without hesitation or remorse. Captain Morrison was right, wasn't he? You have killed before, many times. Dakota's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a sadness so deep it seemed to reach all the way to his soul. "Yes," he said simply, "I have killed soldiers who came to destroy my people. I have killed raiders who attacked our villages. I have killed those who would harm the innocent and the defenseless. But I have never killed for pleasure, never killed for gain, never killed without honor. And tonight I killed to protect someone under my care. In the Lakota way, that is not just acceptable, it is required. A warrior who allows the innocent to suffer when he has the power to prevent it is no warrior at all." Mercy nodded slowly, beginning to understand the complex code that governed this man's actions. He was not a mindless killer, but neither was he a man who would stand by and watch evil triumph. He walked a narrow path between violence and peace, taking life only when necessary to preserve other lives. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you continue your journey," Dakota replied. "But you do not travel alone. The trail ahead is dangerous, and there will be others who seek to harm you. Until you reach a place of safety, Wikapi Oyet and I will watch over you. I can't ask you to do that. You've already sacrificed so much." "You are not asking," he said firmly. "I am choosing. And the choice is mine to make." As they broke camp and prepared to ride into the night, leaving behind the bodies and the blood and the shattered remains of Diamond Jack's ambitions, Mercy felt something she had never experienced before, the certainty that she was not alone in the world. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever challenges she would face in her quest for a new life, she would not face them alone, the wind picked up as they rode away from the cottonwood grove, carrying with it the promise of winter and the scent of distant storms. But for the first time since leaving Deadwood Creek, Mercy Hawthorne was not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She had found something worth more than freedom itself. She had found someone willing to fight for her freedom alongside her. Blizzard struck without mercy on the 7th day of their journey together, transforming the rolling prairie into a white hell where visibility dropped to mere yards and the wind howled like the voices of 1,000 demons. Mercy Hawthorne pressed herself against Dakota's back as they rode double on Wikapi Oyet. The great stallion's strength, the only thing standing between them and a frozen death on the endless plain. For 2 days, they had pushed through the storm, following landmarks that only Dakota could see, navigating by instincts honed through decades of reading the subtle signs of the land. Mercy's horse Buttercup had foundered on the 2nd day, her strength finally failing in the face of the supernatural. Cold. They had been forced to abandon most of their supplies, keeping only the absolute essentials as they fought their way through the white nightmare. "There!" Dakota shouted over the screaming wind, pointing toward what looked like nothing more than another wall of driving snow. "The entrance to Pahaseppa Waste, the sacred valley of my grandmother's people. We will find shelter there." Mercy could see nothing but endless white, but she had learned to trust Dakota's knowledge of the land. He had guided them safely through territories she didn't even know existed, finding water in the desert, game where none seemed possible, and now shelter in the heart of a killing storm. Wikapi Oyet pushed forward through snow that reached nearly to his chest, his breath coming in great clouds of vapor that were instantly torn away by the wind. The stallion's endurance seemed supernatural, where ordinary horses would have collapsed hours ago. He continued with the steady determination of a creature born to survive in this harsh land. The entrance to the valley was so cunningly hidden that Mercy gasped when they suddenly passed through what had appeared to be solid rock. One moment they were fighting the full fury of the blizzard, and the next they were in relative calm, protected by towering stone walls that rose like cathedral spires into the storm-darkened sky. The valley of the Ancient Ones spread before them like something from a fever dream. Hot springs steamed in natural basins carved from living rock, their mineral-rich waters creating pools of impossible blue-green that seemed to glow with inner light. Ancient pictographs covered the valley walls, spirals and animals and human. Figures painted in colors that had survived countless centuries of wind and weather. But it was the structures that took Mercy's breath away. Built into the cliff faces were dwellings of worked stone, their doorways and windows like dark eyes watching over the valley floor. Some were clearly ancient, weathered and worn by time beyond measure. Others looked newer, though still decades or perhaps centuries old. The Anasazi built the first homes here, Dakota explained as they dismounted near one of the steaming pools. The Ancient Ones, as my people call them. They vanished long before the Lakota came to these lands, leaving only their dwellings and their mysteries behind. He led Wikapi Oyat to a natural shelter carved from the rock face, where the horse could escape the worst of the wind, while still having access to the mineral-rich grass that grew near the hot springs. The stallion snorted gratefully and immediately began to graze, seemingly unaffected by their harrowing journey. My grandmother's people discovered this place 3 generations ago, Dakota continued, gathering dried wood from a carefully maintained pile near one of the cliff dwellings. They made it a sanctuary, neutral ground where any person, regardless of tribe or nation, could find shelter and safety. No weapons are drawn here, no blood is shed, no violence is permitted. Mercy looked around the valley with new understanding. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a sacred space, protected by laws older than any government, older than the conflicts that raged across the frontier territories. They took shelter in one of the Anasazi dwellings, a surprisingly spacious chamber with a natural chimney that drew the smoke from their fire up through the rock overhead. The walls were covered with more pictographs, scenes of hunting and ceremony, of seasons changing and stars wheeling across ancient skies. As warmth began to fill the chamber, and the immediate danger of freezing passed, Mercy found herself truly alone with Dakota for the first time since his dramatic rescue at the river. In the firelight, she studied his face, the strong cheekbones, the intelligent dark eyes, the mouth that could be gentle or hard, depending on the circumstances. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked suddenly. "About your reputation, about the things you've done." I had to hear it from Samuel Grimm, and for a moment I wondered if everything I believed about you was a lie. Dakota was quiet for a long time, feeding small pieces of wood to the fire with careful precision. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain and older wisdom. "What would you have had me say?" he replied. "That I have taken the lives of 37 men in battle? That I have led raids against cavalry units that burned Lakota villages? That some of those soldiers were young men who probably had families waiting for them at home?" He looked at her directly. "Would knowing these things have changed what happened in Deadwood Creek?" Mercy considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally, "it wouldn't have. You still saved me when no one else would. You still sacrificed your most precious possession for a stranger's freedom. Then why does it matter now?" "Because I want to understand you," she said with sudden intensity. "Because I've been traveling with a man I thought I knew, only to discover that he's both. A protector and a killer, both gentle and violent, both." She struggled for the words. "Both saint and sinner, I suppose." Dakota smiled, but there was sadness in it. "In the white man's world, you divide people into good and evil, saint and sinner, as if a person can be only one thing. But the world is not divided so neatly. A man can kill his enemies in battle and still weep for their families. A warrior can take lives to protect the innocent and still hate the necessity of it." He stood and walked to the chamber entrance, looking out at the storm that continued to rage beyond the valley's protection. I have killed because my people were being destroyed, their children starved, their women violated, their men shot down like animals. I have killed because sometimes killing is the only language that oppressors understand. And the women and children Grimm mentioned? Dakota's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Once, he said quietly, there was one raid where things went wrong, where young warriors let rage overcome honor. I tried to stop it, but I was too late to save everyone. 3 women died, and 2 children. Their deaths haunt my dreams every night. He turned back to face her, and in his eyes she saw a pain so deep it seemed to go all the way to his soul. That is why I walk alone now, why I no longer lead war parties. I cannot bear to watch honor die in the pursuit of justice. Mercy felt her heart break a little for this complicated man who carried the weight of so much death, so much responsibility, so much moral complexity on his shoulders. She began to understand why he had been so willing to sacrifice everything for her freedom. It was an act of redemption, a chance to save a life instead of taking one. I don't think you're a killer, she said softly. I think you're a man who's been forced to do terrible things in order to protect what he loves. There's a difference. They spent the next 3 days in the sacred valley, waiting for the storm to pass and recovering their strength for the journey ahead. During that time, Mercy learned more about Dakota than she had in all their previous conversations combined. She learned that he had been raised by his grandmother, after his parents died in the smallpox epidemic brought by white traders. She learned that he could speak 4 languages fluently and read the white man's books better than most whites. She learned that he had once wanted to be a medicine man, a healer rather than a warrior, but the violence that consumed his people had forced him onto a different path. Most importantly, she learned that beneath the controlled exterior and the deadly skills lay a man of profound gentleness and wisdom, someone who had seen the worst of human nature, but somehow retained faith in the possibility of something better. The 3rd night, as they sat beside the fire in their ancient shelter, Mercy made a decision that would change both their lives forever. I want to learn, she said suddenly. Learn what? Everything. How to read the land the way you do. How to survive in places where white people would die. How to see the world through Lakota eyes instead of just through my own. She paused, then continued with quiet determination. I want to become worthy of the sacrifice you made for me. Dakota studied her face in the firelight for a long moment. It would not be an easy path, he said finally. My people do not easily accept whites, especially white women. There would be those who would see you as an enemy, regardless of your intentions. Then I'll prove them wrong. And if you cannot, if you find that the gap between our worlds is too great to bridge? Mercy met his gaze steadily. Then at least I'll have tried. At least I'll know that I didn't waste the freedom you gave me. Outside their shelter, the storm was finally beginning to abate. The wind had dropped from a howl to a whisper, and occasionally she could see stars through the breaking clouds. Soon they would have to leave this peaceful sanctuary and return to the dangerous world beyond the valley's protection. But something fundamental had changed. During their time in the sacred valley, they were no longer simply protector and protected, no longer strangers bound together by circumstance and obligation. They had become something new, partners perhaps, or at least 2 people who had chosen to trust each other with truths that could not be shared lightly. There is a place, Dakota said slowly, far to the north near the Canadian border. A hidden camp where the last free Lakota gathered during the winter months. If you truly wish to learn our ways, that is where your education would begin. Is it dangerous? Everything worthwhile is dangerous, he replied. But yes, more dangerous than you can imagine. The army is hunting us there. Other tribes see us as invaders. And the winter shows no mercy to the weak or the unprepared. Mercy thought of her uncle's betrayal, of Diamond Jack's cruelty. of the comfortable but meaningless life she might have lived if she had simply accepted her fate. Then she thought of the freedom she had been given, of the responsibility that came with that freedom, of the chance to become something more than just a victim of circumstance. "When do we leave?" she asked. Tia Keoda smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it was a smile without shadows or sadness. "Tomorrow," he said. "We leave tomorrow." As they prepared for sleep in their ancient shelter, with the storm finally breaking apart outside and the promise of a new journey ahead, Mercy felt something she had never experienced before, the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. The girl who had been bartered away for whiskey was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had chosen her own path, her own teacher, her own destiny. And that destiny, whatever it might hold, would be her own to write. The Lakota winter camp stretched along the frozen banks of the Milk River like a collection of ghosts made manifest in the Montana wilderness. 50 lodges dotted the snow-covered valley, their buffalo hide walls glowing amber in the light of countless fires within. Smoke rose from each dwelling in steady columns, carrying with it the sense of roasted meat, burning sage, and the indefinable essence of a people clinging to their ancient ways in a world that no longer wanted them to exist. Mercy Hawthorne had never seen anything so beautiful or so heartbreaking in her life. She sat astride Wikapi Oyat, beside Dakota, looking down at the camp from a ridge overlooking the valley. After 2 weeks of hard travel through increasingly hostile territory, dodging cavalry patrols and surviving on whatever game Dakota could bring down with his bow, they had finally reached their destination. But now that they were here, Mercy felt a cold knot of fear forming in her stomach that had nothing to do with the bitter wind cutting across the exposed hillside. "They know we're here," Dakota said quietly, pointing to several figures moving between the lodges below. "Scouts spotted us an hour ago." By now, the whole camp knows that Dakota Strongheart has returned, and that he brings a white woman with him. Even from this distance, Mercy could see the agitation their presence was causing. People emerged from their lodges to stare up at the ridge, their voices carrying on the wind in tones that didn't sound particularly welcoming. Dogs began barking, and she could see warriors gathering near the largest lodge at the center of the camp. "Maybe this was a mistake," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Maybe I don't belong here." "Belonging is not given," Dakota replied. "It is earned. And it cannot be earned from a distance." He urged Wikapi Oyat forward, down the treacherous slope toward the camp below. Mercy had no choice but to follow, though every instinct screamed at her to turn and flee back into the wilderness. She had faced many dangers since leaving Deadwood Creek, but none quite like this. The prospect of being judged by an entire community that had every reason to hate and distrust her simply because of the color of her skin. The reception committee that met them at the edge of the camp was formidable and intimidating. Chief Iron Bear stood at its head, a man of perhaps 60 winters whose weathered face showed the accumulated wisdom and sorrow of a lifetime, spent watching his people's world disappear piece by piece. His gray hair was braided with eagle feathers, and his clothes were decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of high status and deep respect within the tribe. Beside him stood War Chief Crazy Horse, not the famous leader by that name, but a younger warrior who had taken the name in honor of the fallen hero. This Crazy Horse was perhaps 30 years old, tall and lean as a wolf, with scars on his arms and chest that told of many battles fought and survived. His eyes burned with barely contained fury as he stared at Mercy, and his hand rested on the handle of a war club that had clearly seen much use, but it was the third member of the reception committee who made Mercy's blood run cold. Medicine Woman White Dove was ancient beyond measure, her face a map of wrinkles that seemed to hold the history of the entire Lakota nation. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and when she looked at Mercy, it felt as though those eyes We're looking directly into her soul and finding it wanting. So, Chief Iron Bear said in English, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of leadership. The ghost killer returns to us, and he brings a Wasichu woman to our winter camp. This requires explanation. Lakota dismounted from Wakapi Oyet and approached the chief with the easy confidence of a man who had known these people his entire life. But Mercy could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself. Even here, among his own people, he was walking a diplomatic tightrope. "Uncle," he said, using the term of respect for an elder, "I bring one who seeks to learn our ways, to understand our people. She has proven herself worthy of consideration." Worthy? War Chief Crazy Horse's voice was like gravel grinding under a wagon wheel. What white woman could ever be worthy of our sacred knowledge? They are the destroyers, the takers, the ones who poison everything they touch. This one is different, Lakota said firmly. She was sold by her own people, treated as property to be traded for whiskey. She understands what it means to be hunted, to be seen as less than human. White Dove stepped forward, her ancient eyes never leaving Mercy's face. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of one who communed regularly with the spirit. "World, different you say? We shall see. Let her come down from her horse. Let her stand before us and speak for herself. Let the spirits judge whether she carries truth in her heart or deception on her tongue." Mercy dismounted on unsteady legs, her hands shaking with cold and fear. She had faced death several times in the past months, but this felt different. More personal, more consequential. These people weren't trying to kill her body. They were trying to determine whether her soul was worth saving. "I am Mercy Hawthorne," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I come seeking knowledge, not to take but to receive. I come seeking understanding, not to judge but to learn." Pretty words. Crazy Horse sneered. But words are wind, and wind changes direction with the weather. What have you done to prove these words have substance? It was then that Lakota did something unexpected. He reached into his medicine bag and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. When he unwrapped it, Mercy gasped in recognition. It was a bullet, lid flattened and deformed by impact. "She took this bullet meant for me," Lakota said, his voice carrying across the gathering crowd that had formed around them. "When the soldiers came in the night 2 weeks ago, when they found our trail and tried to kill us both, she threw herself between their guns and my body. The bullet meant, for my heart found her shoulder instead." Mercy touched her left shoulder reflexively, feeling the tender scar beneath her heavy coat. The wound had healed cleanly, but it still ached when the weather turned cold. She had nearly forgotten about it in the daily struggle to survive, but now she realized what it meant to these people, proof that she was willing to bleed for one of their own. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The hostile murmur of the crowd changed tone, becoming something closer to curiosity than outright animosity. Even Crazy Horse's expression shifted slightly, though his eyes remained suspicious. "She bled for you," Chief Iron Bear said slowly. "This is significant." "More than significant," White Dove added, her voice filled with something that might have been wonder. "In the old prophecies, it is written that the healing of our people will come through one who shares our blood willingly, one who chooses our pain as her own." "You're not suggesting," Crazy Horse began, but the medicine woman cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I suggest nothing. I observe, I remember. I wait to see what the spirits will reveal." She approached Mercy with steps that seemed to glide across the snow without leaving tracks. "Show me the wound, child. Let these old eyes see what you have given for one of our sons." With trembling fingers, Mercy unbuttoned her heavy coat and pulled aside her shirt to reveal the scar on her shoulder. The wound had healed into a neat, pale line about 3 inches long, but the surrounding skin still showed the discoloration of recent trauma. "White," Dove studied the scar with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. Her gnarled fingers traced the air above the wound without quite touching it, and Mercy could have sworn she felt heat radiating from the old woman's hands. "Wakia Oyet," White Dove whispered. "Thunder people." The scar has the shape of a lightning bolt, the mark of those chosen by the thunder beings. She looked up at Mercy with eyes that suddenly seemed to burn with inner fire. "You carry powerful medicine, child. But medicine can heal or harm, depending on how it is used." "I don't understand," Mercy said. "You will," the medicine woman replied, cryptically, "or you will die trying. There's no middle path for those marked by the thunder beings." Chief Iron Bear raised his hand for silence as the crowd's murmur grew louder. "The woman will be tested," he announced. 7 days and 7 nights in the Lodge of Preparation. If she survives with her spirit intact, she may begin to learn our ways. If not, he shrugged eloquently. "And if she refuses the test?" Crazy Horse asked. "Then she leaves now, tonight, and never returns," the chief replied. "The choice is hers." Mercy looked around at the circle of faces surrounding her, some curious, some hostile, some simply waiting to see what she would do. She thought of the comfortable life she could have had if she had simply accepted her uncle's bargain, of the safe path that would have led to a predictable death of the spirit. Then she thought of everything Dakota had sacrificed to give her, the chance to choose her own fate. "I accept the test," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the winter camp. "Whatever it requires, I accept." The Lodge of Preparation was smaller than the others, set apart from the main camp like a thing that carried its own particular power. As Dakota led her toward it, he spoke in low, urgent tones. 7 days without food, he explained. 7 nights without sleep. You will drink only water mixed with sacred herbs, and you will pray continuously to the spirits for guidance. Some who enter the lodge emerge with visions that change their lives forever. Others emerge broken in mind and spirit. And some don't emerge at all. Some choose not to, he admitted. The test shows you truths about yourself that not everyone can bear to see. At the entrance to the lodge, he stopped and took her hands in his. I cannot help you in this. Once you enter, you must face whatever comes alone. But know this, I believe in your strength, in your courage, in your spirit. You have already survived more than most warriors face in a lifetime. As Mercy ducked through the entrance into the dim interior of the lodge, she felt as though she were crossing a threshold into another world entirely. The walls were covered with painted symbols that seemed to shift and move in the flickering light of a small fire at the center of the space. Bundles of sage and sweetgrass hung from the roof poles, filling the air with their sacred smoke. White Dove waited inside, along with 2 younger women who would serve as her attendants during the ordeal ahead. Without ceremony, they began to strip away her white woman's clothing, replacing it with a simple dress of soft deerskin decorated with symbols Mercy didn't recognize. The old life ends here, White Dove intoned as the last of Mercy's familiar clothes were taken away. What emerges 7 days hence will be something new, if anything emerges at all. As the lodge entrance was sealed and the long test began, Mercy Hawthorne felt her old identity slipping away like water through her fingers. Somewhere in the darkness ahead lay either transformation or destruction, and there was no way to know which until the journey was complete. The girl who had been sold for whiskey was about to discover whether she had the strength to become something the world had never seen before. A white woman who truly understood what it meant to be Lakota. On the 5th night in the Lodge of Preparation, when hunger had become a living thing gnawing at her bones, and thirst had transformed her tongue into cracked leather, Mercy Hawthorne began to see things that existed beyond the boundaries of the physical world. The sacred herbs White Dove had mixed into her meager water rations were taking effect, opening doorways in her mind that had been sealed since childhood. The painted symbols on the lodge walls writhed and danced in her peripheral vision, becoming animals, becoming people, becoming stories that played out in colors that had no names in any language she knew. But it was on the sixth night that the true vision came. Mercy found herself standing in a place that was both the winter camp and somewhere else entirely, a realm where the past, present, and future existed simultaneously like overlapping photographs. She could see the lodge around her, but she could also see through it to a vast prairie that stretched endlessly in all directions, where buffalo thundered across grass that rippled like green water in an eternal wind. Standing before her was a woman of impossible beauty and terrible sadness. Her skin had the golden color of autumn leaves, her hair flowed like black water to her waist, and her eyes held the depth of centuries. She wore a dress of pure white buckskin decorated with stars that actually twinkled, and in her hands she held two objects that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "I am San Win," the woman said, her voice carrying the music of wind through sacred mountains. "White buffalo calf woman, the one who brought the sacred pipe to the Lakota people in the time when the world was young." Mercy tried to speak, but found she had no voice in this place between worlds. She could only listen, only witness, only receive whatever wisdom the spirit woman had come to share. "You stand at the crossroads of two destinies," White buffalo calf woman continued, raising the objects in her hands so Mercy could see them clearly. In her right hand was a shanupa, a sacred pipe carved from red stone, its bowl decorated with eagle feathers and buffalo hair. In her left hand was a simple wooden cross, worn smooth by countless hands and darkened with age. "One path leads you back to the world you came from," the spirit woman explained, lifting the cross higher. "You can return to the white settlements. Use the strength you have gained here to build a comfortable life among your own people. You will marry a good man, bear children, grow old surrounded by familiar comforts. It is not a bad path. Millions have walked it before you." The cross began to glow with warm golden light, and Mercy could see images forming within its wooden surface, a small farmhouse with smoke rising from its chimney, children playing in a yard bright with wildflowers, a man with kind eyes waiting for her on a front porch. It was everything she had ever thought she wanted, everything that represented safety and belonging and acceptance. "But there is another path," White buffalo calf woman said, now raising the sacred pipe. "A path that has never been walked before, one that will require you to become something new, something that exists between worlds rather than within them." The pipe began to emit a different kind of light, not golden, but silver blue, like starlight reflected on flowing water. Within its glow, Mercy saw images that made her heart race with fear and longing. She saw herself dressed in Lakota regalia, leading ceremonies that bridged two cultures. She saw white children and Indian children playing together without hatred or fear. She saw treaties signed in honor instead of broken in greed. She saw a future where the walls between peoples had crumbled into dust. "This second path will cost you everything you have ever known," the spirit woman warned. "You will belong fully to neither world, trusted completely by neither people. Some whites will call you a traitor, some Lakota will call you a pretender. You will walk alone through territories of the spirit that have no maps, no guides, no guarantees of safe passage." Mercy found her voice at last, though it sounded strange and hollow in this place between worlds. "Why me? Why show me this choice? I'm nobody special, just a girl who was sold for whiskey and saved by a warrior's kindness." White buffalo calf woman smiled, and when she did, the entire vision space filled with light that was neither golden nor silver, but something beyond. Both. Because sometimes the most important changes come from the most unlikely sources. Because sometimes the spirits choose their instruments not for their strength, but for their willingness to be broken and remade. And if I choose the second path, what guarantee do I have that any of it will work, that anything will change? None, the spirit woman replied simply. The only guarantee is that the attempt will transform you into something the world has never seen before. Whether that transformation serves the greater good or leads to your own destruction, that remains to be written. The vision began to fade at the edges, reality bleeding back in like water through a cracked dam. But before White Buffalo Calf Woman disappeared entirely, she spoke one final time. The choice must be made with your whole heart, child of two worlds. Half measures and hesitation will serve no one. Whatever path you choose, walk it with the conviction of one who knows that every step matters, that every choice echoes through generations yet unborn. Mercy awoke on the morning of the 7th day to find White Dove sitting beside her, the ancient medicine woman's pale eyes studying her face with the intensity of one reading sacred texts. You have seen something, Old Woman said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Mercy whispered, her voice hoarse from days of prayer and fasting. I've seen ... choices, paths, futures that might be. And what will you choose? Mercy closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical thing. She thought of the comfortable life she could build in the white world, the children she might have, the simple joys that came with belonging somewhere completely and without question. Then she thought of Dakota, waiting somewhere beyond the lodge walls. She thought of the magnificent Wikapi Oyet, who had been torn from his world but had chosen to serve rather than break. She thought of all the girls who might one day face the same choice she had faced in Deadwood Creek, the choice between degradation and freedom, between despair and hope. I choose the harder path, she said finally. I choose to become something new. White Dove nodded slowly, as if this answer had been expected. Then we begin the real work. The vision quest was only the preparation. Now comes the transformation itself. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in Mercy's experience. The entire winter camp gathered in a great circle around a massive fire that seemed to burn with flames of every color. Chief Iron Bear stood at the fire's edge wearing the regalia of his office, a magnificent war bonnet whose eagle feathers caught and reflected the dancing light, a shirt decorated with the history of his people in intricate beadwork and painted symbols. War Chief Crazy Horse was there too, his earlier hostility replaced by something that might have been grudging respect. Dakota stood with the other warriors, his face painted with symbols Mercy was only beginning to understand, markings that spoke of his role as protector, as bridge builder, as one who walked between worlds. But it was White Dove who commanded the ceremony, her ancient voice rising and falling in chants that seemed to call down power from the very stars. She moved around the fire with steps that defied her apparent age, carrying bundles of sage and sweetgrass that filled the air with sacred smoke. Mercy Hawthorne dies tonight, the medicine woman announced, her words carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. What is born in her place will have a new name, a new purpose, a new destiny written in the smoke of this sacred fire. The transformation began with the burning of her old clothes, the simple dress she had worn into the lodge, the boots that had carried her across hundreds of miles of frontier territory, even the small locket that had been her last connection to her mother. Each item fed the flames with its own distinct color, its own pattern of sparks, its own contribution to the sacred smoke that rose toward the star-filled sky. I give you a new name, White Dove declared as the last remnants of Mercy's old life disappeared into the fire. Thahahahahthga win, White Dear Woman, you will walk between the worlds, carrying messages of peace to both peoples. You will speak truth to power, regardless of the color of the skin that holds it. You will serve as a bridge across the canyon of hatred that divides the children of the Great Spirit. New clothes were brought forward, not the elaborate regalia of a full tribal member, but something unique, something that had never been seen before. The dress was made of white buckskin, but it was decorated with symbols from both cultures. Christian crosses worked alongside Lakota sacred symbols, eagle feathers paired with ribbons of blue and white. It was a garment that proclaimed its wearer's dual nature, her refusal to choose one identity over another. As the ceremony reached its climax, Lakota stepped forward from the circle of warriors. In his hands he carried something that made the entire crowd gasp in recognition and wonder. The magnificent bridle that had once belonged to Wikipi Oyet, the same bridle he had traded for her freedom in Deadwood Creek. Diamond Jack McCready is dead, he announced, his voice carrying across the silent camp. Killed 3 days ago when he tried to break the spirit of a horse that would not be broken. In his arrogance, he believed he could master what was meant to be free. The horse killed him with a single kick to the head, then broke free of his corrals and returned to the place where honor still lives. As if summoned by his words, Wikipi Oyet emerged from the darkness beyond the firelight. The magnificent stallion approached the ceremony circle with steps that seemed to dance to the rhythm of the drum beats, his coat gleaming like liquid shadow and silver in the firelight. Around his neck he wore not Jack's crude rope halter, but his original beautiful bridle, somehow recovered, somehow restored to its rightful place. He chooses his own riders, Lakota continued, offering the reins to White Deer Woman. He chooses his own battles, his own purpose, his own destiny. Like you, he has become something that exists between worlds, neither fully wild nor fully tamed, but something new entirely. White Deer Woman, no longer Mercy Hawthorne, approached the great stallion with reverent steps. When she placed her hand on his neck, she felt a connection that went deeper than flesh and bone, a bond that existed in the realm of spirits and dreams and destinies, shared across the vast web of existence. As she swung onto Wikipi Oyet's back, feeling the power and freedom that flowed between them like electricity, White Deer Woman understood that her transformation was complete. She was no longer the girl who had been bartered for whiskey, no longer the woman who had been saved by a warrior sacrifice. She had become something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds, a voice for understanding, a living symbol of what was possible when hatred gave way to hope. The ceremony ended with the entire camp singing a song that had no words, only the ancient melody of wind across endless grassland and water flowing over stone. As their voices rose toward the stars, White Deer Woman felt the last vestiges of her old life disappear like smoke on the prairie wind. Somewhere in the future, she knew there would be challenges that would test everything she had learned and become. There would be those who would reject her message, who would prefer the familiar comfort of hatred to the difficult work of understanding. There would be times when she would question her choice, when the burden of walking between worlds would seem too heavy to bear. But tonight, surrounded by people who had accepted her not despite her differences, but because of them, riding a horse that had chosen freedom over subjugation, carrying a name that proclaimed her unique place in the great story of two peoples learning to see each other as human. Tonight, she was exactly who she was meant to be. The girl sold for whiskey had become a woman who could not be bought, sold, or traded. She belonged to no one and everyone, claimed by both worlds and limited by neither. She was White Deer Woman, and her real journey was just beginning.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.